I thought I'd start with this question because this is the question that I dread most in the world. Actually, the only one who hates it more than me is my mom. So basically, it's like someone will say to me, hey, what do you do? And I'll say, oh, I'm a designer. And they'll sort of pause for a moment. And the first thing they'll say is like, oh, right, you're a fashion designer. Like, that's amazing. It's like you must do amazing things. It's so glamorous. And I'm like, no, actually, I'm not a fashion designer. And then people get kind of bored and often just walk away at that point. But if they actually persist, they'll be like, oh, okay, wait, if you're not a fashion designer, you must be an interior designer, because I've totally seen that on reality television where people like take over a house and do the design, and I'll be like, no, I'm actually not that as well. So sometimes when people push a little further, they'll say, well, are you an architect? Because that's the other kind of design that people know really well. And as it turns out, I am an architect. I don't know if anyone recognizes this. This is Fountainhead, Howard Rourke. I'm not that kind of architect. Actually, it's like, and the reality is I'm a different kind of designer, different kind of architect. And those of us from IDEO like think about design in really, really different ways. We actually believe everyone's a designer. We believe everyone in this room is a designer. We believe anyone who's ever played with Lego is a designer. Anyone who's had to kind of take things that don't make sense and somehow or another put them together and make sense of them is actually doing designer's work. And we think that that means that pretty much anybody can do it and everybody should be doing it. So the way I think about it at the most simple level is that design is about thinking really, really carefully about the things we make. And that might seem like a simple proposition, but if you think about how many things aren't thought about carefully, it's not. It's like you realize that most of the things we run up against are not thought about with the kind of depth that they really believe. And so what we believe is that the more you think about it, the deeper you go into something, the better what you make is going to be. And we should all be making things in the world. And we should all be practicing design. So what we did this week is we asked everyone here to practice design. So you spent days listening to the things that were coming out of the conversations, and some of you went home and collapsed because it was like so much information. Sometimes you walked away depressed, sometimes you walked away just like addled because you had no idea what to think about it. What we asked a bunch of people to do, and we had about 100 people every night come through, is basically reflect on what they were hearing from the day, and from that answer a couple questions, which is, of the things that you've heard, what's the most catalytic thing that you've actually witnessed? So what do you believe is going to be like a foundation for the future? And then what do you think the future will be? By the way, those aren't easy questions, and it's not like you just take strangers and put people through it and expect that people will be able to do it. Everyone did it. Everyone. People sat down, worked with those questions, filled out these forms, and basically you were there last night, and had like pretty interesting visions about what the future might be. Actually, pretty remarkably interesting visions. And so we were just amazed at how people just kind of wanted to do this and how exciting it was. Our sessions were 45 minutes. People wanted us, they were like, can we have another 20 minutes? And we'd be like, no, you have to go on to your cocktails, your dinners, or whatever those things are that you had to do. And then, my favorite part of it is that we had people, now I call them citizen designers, you, come forward, and you had panelists. They were reviewers who basically looked at the ideas that you had and said, I think that's a great idea, or I don't think that's a great idea. And the panelists, who we called catalysts or reviewers, were fantastic. If you don't recognize it, this is David Gergen. He's like, that's a horrible idea. But it was great. We were getting real feedback about real things that people had designed. So that's the work that we did. And the really fun part is that there's a group called the Bezos Scholars, which are a group of 16-year-olds that we actually took a bunch of the briefs that came out of the sessions to them the other day, and we had them actually designing. So they actually built visions. So we'll share you some of that work as well. But before we do that, I thought I would talk a little bit more about design and what we think about. But when we think about design and when we think about the questions that come to us, the most common question that comes to IDEO is, what is the future of blank? Pretty much if people know exactly what they're going to do, they don't come to us. They come to us when they feel like the world feels slightly unsteady, their market might be slightly unsteady, or they don't know what's happening with people. The people might be changing. And here's the point. All people are changing now, changing radically and changing quickly. And so actually the question of what is the future of blank is a really important question to be asking. Just so you know, we do things all over the space. Like we actually do, if we think about government, we think about work in healthcare, we do work in product design, which many of people have, we do work in education. This week, we decided we wanted to tackle 4 what ifs. What are the futures of? And I'll just kind of throw out what those were. What's the future of education? I think it's something that's on a lot of our minds. How is that working? Is it breaking? What's the future of health? Something that actually has been breaking for a while. employment, which seemed like a really important topic, especially for today. So we asked what was the future of an employed America. And then lastly, citizenship, and had a tremendous dialogue the first day about what the future of citizenship would be. So before we go into kind of the feedback, and I'm going to ask our IDEO team to kind of say what did they hear and what were the things that came forward, I am going to talk a little bit about design as we think is in tight. No problem. Yeah.
Nothing personal.
Anything else? No. Okay. So I'm going to talk about design and the kind of the practices that we believe are really critical to design. The first, and by the way, these are all the practices we asked you to work on this week. The first is that good designers are very observant and really reflective. They really spend time watching the world. And the reality is that seems like a pretty easy thing to do. It's actually not. In fact, most of the world is spent not looking, not listening, not paying attention. I just moved to New York, and it's funny to watch. Like, I can't believe anyone can walk down the street because everyone's on their phone. Literally, everyone's on their phone colliding with each other. And the people who aren't on their phones, who actually don't have iPhones, they're reading books while they're walking on the street because it's like they just want to tune the place out as much as they possibly can. Likewise, listening is a really funny thing. We think we listen, but the reality is, do we? And then if you look at our lives, I'll often Google classroom pictures because I'm like, oh, let's get a good Google. And like, you cannot find a classroom picture where you don't find the kids raising their hands. And if you think about raising your hands, it's really about waiting for you to speak, not necessarily listening to the person who's speaking before you. And so looking and listening feel like easy things to do. They're actually foundational, and I would actually ask you all to reflect on how often you're paying attention to the world that's around you. When you do, you actually get so much amazing things when you actually kind of watch. And so we believe the most important work of a designer is to actually be observant to the world around them. We also believe that you should go out in the world, understand, but it doesn't mean that you go out and ask people what you should design. So you don't go out and say, hey, tell me this, like what you want the new version of the phone, what should it be? Because actually we believe that mostly people don't know what they want. Or if they do, they might not say what they want. So one of my favorite stories that's got nothing to do with IDEO is a story that we heard, or I'd read about in the New York Times, and this was out a couple years ago, and it was actually about the music industry. And the conversation was this, which is that the music industry has been really good at surveying people constantly to get data about what people should be designing, right? So they're basically out there, or what you should be listening to. So basically they're out there constantly asking questions about what kind of music you listen to. And this story was about this one specific question, which is that they would ask people, when they would survey people, they would say, hey, when you're alone in your car or alone in your house, what music do you listen to? What do you listen to? Anyone want to guess what the number one answer was when they would ask that question? There's a big classical. Right, there's a big hint. Yeah, so, thank you. But yes, classical music. So that's it. So when people would say, when I'm alone in the car, what I would actually do is I listen to classical music. Well, so here's the thing. If you're a classical music station, you know that's not true. In fact, it's like you're sure of it, because it's like they're dying left and right. And so the story was about this little device that you wore on your belt, and what it did is it listened to the music that you listened to. And it turns out, and this dates the story, that the music people listened to the most when they were alone at home or in their car was Celine Dion. So the reality is, there's a lot of reasons why you wouldn't say what I listen to is Celine Dion. A lot. There's a lot of reasons why you would say classical music. And there's a lot embedded in it. There's like the perceptions that we have about ourselves, the things we want to carry, the things that really matter. And so the reality is, it's not that we're lying, it's just that we often are kind of bending the truth when people ask us questions. My favorite example from one of our projects is we did a project for a large university. And this university was looking at new curricular concepts, and they basically had come to us and they said, well, one thing we do know about our students is that they just don't read. They don't read at all. And so we went in with this assumption, which we'll come back to later, that people don't read. And so we thought about this quite a bit. And we would go in, and when we did talk to people, we would say, do you read? And people would be like, oh, I don't read at all. And so we were getting the affirmation. So we were with this one woman in her house, and we basically asked her a bunch of questions, and we're spending time with her and looking at the way she learns. And we basically said, so do you read? And she's like, never. Like, I never read. It's like, it's not the way I've learned. I don't like it very much. And we're like, okay, that's great. And she's walking us around the house, and she's kind of showing us where she works, and she takes us into her bedroom. And on her bedroom wall is basically every single Twilight book, or any book where a vampire is dating a werewolf, basically, is like on her wall. All of them. And we're like, wow. like, that it looks like you read a lot. She's like, well, that's not reading. That's like something else. And actually what's interesting is it wasn't reading to her. It was something else entirely. But if you think about it from a designer's perspective, there's a tremendous amount of insight you get from that. Because suddenly you know that actually she does read, but she reads certain kinds of things. And actually that means that you can actually begin to think about how you would design a curriculum for her. So we don't ask, we do observe, we try to spend real time with people. And that's the last thing I'm going to talk about in this section, which is that real time, observing real things, actually the more time you spend watching, the more you learn. So we do a lot of work at the systems scale. So we're thinking about how will people save money in America? How will retirement happen in America? And those are big, big systems. And we believe that to understand a system, you have to spend real time watching it. Not just like talking to people about it, but really watching the way a system works. And so I'll give you an example about how we see a system play out. And this is actually a very, it's like a basic version. But this is actually a store. I just moved to New York. There's a store called Le Petit Puppy in the West Village. I don't know, has anyone been to Le Petit Puppy? Yeah, it's kind of amazing. So if you go by the store, almost pretty much any time of day, you'll walk by and there's a massive crowd outside the store. They're all there, and you look and you're like, well, of course, like they're all there because like they're puppies. Who doesn't like puppies? So there's like these like little things in the window, and so everyone's gathered around to look at these puppies, and if you sort of spend like a couple minutes, you're watching that, and you're like, well, that's the reason people are kind of gathered is because they're there to watch these puppies, these really cute puppies. By the way, when you're presenting, always put a cute puppy in your presentation. It makes everybody, I watched everybody's eyes light up when this came on. So it's like, and there's a story around that, why that's true. But so basically, you watch the crowd and you sort of see and you're like, okay, they're watching the puppies, that's the reason why. If you spend about 10 minutes, not 5 minutes, and you're watching this kind of this scene, what you realize is there are people who are watching the puppies, and then there are actually people who are there to pick up the people who are watching the puppies. And it's a really good, I heard someone say, yeah, because it's a good strategy. It's a really good strategy because you're looking at this puppy and you're like, your heart melts and you look up and you see this guy or gal next to you and you're like, that's it, that's my future, or whatever. It's just like, it's the perfect thing. So it's like this, so yeah, totally. It's like this transference, right? So basically you're there, and if you watch 10 minutes, what you see is that there's a really different system. What's actually really happening is people are watching the puppies, and then there are people who are trying to pick up the puppies. So a little system. If you spend 20 minutes, a little longer than you might want to in front of a puppy store in the West Village, but if you spend a little longer, what you'll see is that there are people who are watching the puppies. And there are people who are there to kind of pick up the people watching the puppies. And then there are people who are there who are watching the people, picking up the people, watching the puppies. And so basically, there's this whole other ecosystem that's actually happened, and it's all happening. And so if you spend 20 minutes, you see a system you wouldn't have seen otherwise. And so the point is, the longer you spend, the more you observe and the more you get a sense of the real systems, and you can actually influence that. The store has watched this because they've put actually benches out in front of the store, and the benches don't face out to the street, they face to the windows because they know people want to watch people picking up people watching. Well, I can't even say anymore, but it's basically like they want to watch it. So the reality is for IDEO, we believe spending time actually gives you insight into a systems that you wouldn't see otherwise. So it's not just about looking, it's not just about observing, it's about spending real time in that context. The other thing we believe is really critical is asking the right question. And I think I'm going to hit on this because how many times have you kind of hit something and you feel like you're getting the same answers over and over again, the things you've thought about again and again. And the question I often ask is, are you asking the right question? And one of the things we're going to ask you to do before you leave is think about what the right question might be of the things you've heard of from today. And there's some clues that we have about how to ask the right question. So one of the things we believe is that when you go into a questioning process to kind of basically say, at IDEO we call this a how might we design something, we really believe you should be aware of precedents. That actually there's a good reason why you look at precedent, you look at history, but the reality is that precedent can often make you focused in a direction that may not be the right way to focus. And so this is one of my favorite examples of it. This is this guy, Anton, well, this is not the guy. There's a guy named Anton Marcos, who's the mayor of Bogota, Colombia. He was. And when he inherited Bogota, there were so many societal issues, tons and tons that he was grappling with. One of which was, I think, kind of the most critical at that time was people who were being killed in traffic accidents, people who were basically, there's a high pedestrian fatality rate in Bogota. People who were walking across the street were getting hit by cars that had made illegal turns, or they were actually walking through the middle of the street. And so he asked the question, how might we think about fixing this? How might we fix traffic fatalities? And they looked at the precedents. What had they done before? And one of the things that they actually had seen before is that if you give people like big tickets, like for lots and lots of money, that sometimes stops people from like jaywalking or making illegal U-turns or things like that. So basically they were giving these really expensive tickets out. Wasn't doing any good. And so basically he went back to the drawing board and went back with his team and he said, okay, let's think about this. We're still asking the question of how might we fix, this situation, but are we actually using the wrong precedents? Like what really matters to Colombians? What's really important? And so as they sat and kind of built empathy for each other and said, well, what do we care about? What they realized is far more than money, what people really cared about was their pride in Bogota. That basically it's like that they didn't want to be humiliated. So he was like, great. We have a great idea then. Let's replace all the police officers who are on the corners with mimes. And what the mimes will do is they'll make fun of people when they actually break the law. So that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing a mime running after somebody with a big incorrecto sign and mocking them on the street. And like literally, it's like, by the way, it's like, if you haven't had that happen, it's humiliating. It's so horrible. So within 6 months, traffic fatalities had dropped almost by half, a really significant amount. Simple solution with a really simple insight at the basis of it. It was so successful that he trained police officers how to use mime training when they were actually out policing the neighborhoods. So actually, like the police officers could do it. It's so successful now that I challenge you to go to a major city in South America and you will see mimes on the corners because it's actually spread across the whole continent because it's such a powerful insight. So again, putting aside the precedent for a moment, still asking the right question got to something way better. Don't assume. This is another project. This is a project that we did actually, where we were working in Peru, and we're looking at voting and why the voting was kind of like such a significant issue. And because actually it's quite funny, in Peru it's mandatory, but people still hate voting actually. And so we were talking to our client at that point, and the client was basically like, the reason people don't vote is because they don't have enough information. And what's interesting is, as we spent time out there, that wasn't true at all. In fact, there was tons of information. If you ever are in Peru, literally voting information is pretty much everywhere. I love this. This is a hut on the way up to Machu Picchu where there's basically like a big sign that tells you how to vote when you get back down. I mean, really, it's like there's tons of information. What we actually saw was, in fact, that the reason people didn't vote is that they believed that the government was corrupt. They believed it was so corrupt that actually voting didn't matter. So when you actually put that back in there and you say, okay, if that assumption's wrong, there's a different assumption, you get different kinds of solutions. And I'll talk about some of the solutions a little bit later on. But one of my favorite examples about how they battled corruption, that was just like a really example when they actually kind of asked the question, please take a seat, is that they grappled with this in Lima. So in Lima, actually, there were such serious doubts about the police and police corruption. Nobody actually believed that when they were given tickets, that actually it wasn't just a bribe. And so basically, like there was like a lot of kind of people who just didn't believe in the police. And so they basically said, well, then how might we think about this that we actually kind of get people to believe that the police force isn't corrupt? And what they did is they said, well, who do we trust in Peru? And women and mothers, the people that we trusted. So they actually created a group called Phoenix, which is sort of like the Charlie's Angels of Lima. And they were all women police force who basically out there, and they were policing the streets. And guess what? There was this tremendous uprise in people's trust and confidence in the police in Lima. So really shifting it made a big difference. By the way, they were as corrupt as the men, but it didn't matter. Actually, it's like the perception was that that it was less corrupt. The other thing we believe in is that the most important thing to bring into your questions, and even if you were in some of our sessions, you'll ask that sometimes we'll be like, don't think too broad, be a little more narrower, is that constraints are a good thing. Putting constraints around a problem actually help you think in new and interesting ways. And so this is just my favorite example. This is from the museum world, but these are two different museums. One that's actually thinking about their constraints and one that's not. So there's a museum. Who's been to the museum in Washington? Awesome, great. So this is a sign in the museum, and there's a great section where there's like 4 pieces of the Berlin Wall that are stretched out. It's just an amazing thing to see. And in front of it, they have this sign that says, please do not touch. In order to maintain the integrity of the Berlin Wall, we would like you not to touch the wall. So guess what? It's not, there's no integrity in the Berlin Wall anymore. These are pieces of the Berlin Wall that's just been placed there. It's kind of this moment where people didn't think about the context of where they were actually putting something in. my favorite museum, one of my favorite museums in the world, is a museum in Paris. It's really small, called the Musée de Chasse et Nature. And it's basically all about hunting. It's like a museum of taxidermy, which is, I can't believe that that's my favorite museum. But what's amazing is when you go, they've thought about the constraints of being a museum about nature and hunting. And everywhere they go, they've actually answered the questions like, how do we keep people from touching things, in a way that feels exactly right for their context. So this is a chair that they have. They have all these beautiful brocade chairs from all over. And they don't want people climbing on the chairs, much the same way you don't want to be touching the Berlin Wall. And what they've done, and that you might not be able to see it, is every chair in the space has a little thistle, a big thorn sitting on it. And so if you're a kid, you're like, not going there. It's like the universal thing that basically says, don't sit here, basically. But it's totally within the constraints of what they actually are doing. And so when you actually embrace who you are, embrace your constraints, you actually can get much better solutions often. So we often think about that when we're asking questions in the world. The last thing, I think the most important thing that we ask designers to do, and the thing that we asked you to do this week, is to be brave and think about the future, to kind of go forward. Be brave and be optimistic. And that seems easy. It's not. It's actually hard sometimes to do that. I'm going to give you a couple examples of places where we've just seen brave, bold design solutions that have happened. And this is one of my favorite. It's actually a great example of piggybacking. If anyone's been to Mumbai or New Delhi or anything like that, what you realize is that traffic is just terrible. I was actually telling a story yesterday that I was in Mumbai with somebody. We're trying to get across town with a stranger in a taxi, and by the time we got out of the taxi, we were like crying and hugging and exchanging addresses because we'd been in the taxi for 6 hours, So it's so really you're like my best friend, and it's like I'm so glad we had that. It's traffic's horrible, and so the problem is how do you fix it? Because what they know is you'll never be able to deploy enough police in the world to actually fix traffic in New Delhi or in Mumbai, and so the police did this really amazing thing. They looked at behaviors, and they saw that two things. People love reporting other people, right? It's like you love when you're angry and in traffic, you're like, that person broke a law. You would love doing it. And Facebook had really been on the rise. So what they did is they built a Facebook page for the police station where if you took a picture of somebody doing something illegal and they had the license plate, they would send a ticket to that person. They would just mail the ticket to the person. So guess what? It went who doesn't want to do that? It's like that would work in any city in the world, right? So it's but a really simple solution, piggybacking about behaviors that people already had, but quite significant, quite a large solution that came out of it. Another example, I think I'm suddenly finding I'm dealing a lot with police corruption. I don't know what's on my mind a lot, but but Georgia has this real issue right now. Not Georgia the state, Georgia the country, actually has this issue around police corruption. It's been a really significant thing, and one of the things that they did that I thought was it seems simple, but it was a total design move, is that they actually they closed all their normal police stations. And they actually made every new police station that they built entirely transparent and open plan. So basically, you can go up to anything and you can see into the police station from all sides. If you walk in, it's entirely open plan. So what it does is it's using design to actually suggest that actually it's okay. You can come in, you can watch us, you can see us, and see us in a really clear way. So sometimes, and I think a tremendously bold thing to do, and an amazingly simple thing to do that actually kind of suggests a whole different way of thinking about transparency and police and crime. And then I think I've got two more of this, which is be big. I live in New York. The High Line's my favorite example of basically using design to transform a public space. Basically, it was these tracks that were there. They didn't even know what they wanted. They had a huge design competition to do it. We work with them. They think like designers in the way they engage. And what they did is they actually made it into one of the biggest and most crowded and popular parks in New York, but doing it through a very simple transition, but actually a quite brave move to do. I thought I would end with one last story going back to Peru. So remember I told you the story about how there was this real issue around corruption. So we came back to our client, and this happens sometimes, and we were like, so actually it's not about knowledge, it's actually about corruption. And so we think we need to kind of solve problems thinking about corruption first. And they were they kind of didn't believe it. They were we really don't believe that's actually what the big issue is. And we're we're pretty sure it is from what we've done in the field. And we're and we have some ideas that we'd like to share. And some of the ideas were things like, we want to take the town hall and paint a report card on the town hall that basically says, here's what I've done. So every time the mayor and his staff had done something well, they would go out and paint a big X, being like, we did what we promised, basically, on the town hall. The other idea was basically letting people vote with their feet. We created this sticker campaign called Fix This, Arreglo Esto, that was actually a sticker that people could actually put on anything they thought was broken in the city. And so the client, I have to say, hated these ideas, hated them. They were like, this amounts to defacing public property, and Peruvians will never go do something like this. And we were like, can we just try it? Can we take it into the field and see? So we actually took these design ideas out into the field and spent time with real people and just basically had them kind of observe it. So what's interesting is, and so we printed out thousands and thousands of the stickers, we'd done all this sort of stuff, is that the number one idea was painting a report card on the town hall. That people loved that idea. They were desperate for it. We don't even know if the sticker campaign was popular because they all disappeared within like 5 minutes. And basically, we were walking around Cusco, and we'd seen the people, like police officers had slapped them on the backs of their friends. Like, it's like other police officers. They were on the fronts of school doors. Basically, it was everywhere. And so just by kind of trying it, putting it out in the field, we actually saw things kind of getting fixed. We were able to prove to the client that, in fact, we were right around the hypothesis that we had. So that's a little bit about the way we think about design. Just to kind of reiterate, those are the things we asked people to do this week. We asked people to basically reflect on what they'd heard, to kind of frame the right question, and we asked them to think about the future. And so what I'll do now is I'm going to pass it over to our teams to just talk really briefly about some of the themes that came forward there and kind of work from that. And we'll share that, maybe share one idea, one design idea that came out of it, and then we'll just open it up for questions if there's thoughts. Cool. You want to go first? Sure. Do you need this? You want this? Oh, you got that.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. I ran this session on employment, which I basically co-opted to say, as a new mom, what the heck is my baby going to do for a job in 17 years? But in all seriousness, we had a really good discussion, and I think it was actually quite optimistic and bold for a subject that can feel so heavy and laden with problems at the moment. So the themes that started to emerge at the high level was really around how people will be more fluid around employment. They'll have more autonomy and independence in the way in which they work. And we saw this consistently start to drill down in the way people will then have relationships to learning because it's something that's ongoing in their lives, the support systems that will start to emerge that surround this. So if you think about healthcare or childcare and it's no longer anchored to an employer, there starts to be really interesting ideas of how our society evolves to make that happen. We also talked about the currency of work being about skills, which I know there's a lot of conversation around, but thinking in the fact that that's what we're going to forefront. We're not going to be forefronting resumes with past experience. We're going to be forefronting what we can do and the skills that we're constantly acquiring. Sure. So these were just a couple of the concepts that came forward. Some of them more controversial than other. We had a concept called the branded individual, where they actually took it so far to say you're leading with the brand and you're putting your skills forward and you're constantly talking about the projects and badges that you acquire to make yourself relevant to new types of work and new types of employers. Also, I really like this idea of constant learning, in that education will not end after college or after a master's degree, because work will continue to change quite rapidly. It will require us to actually equip ourselves with skills in really new ways. So if you think about the future of online learning and where we can attain these things, it will just be something that's totally integrated into our lives. So super great discussion, and thank you all for participating. Now I'm going to hand it over to the lovely Sandy Spiker.
Thanks, Patrice. Hello, everyone. How many of you were in the education session? Represent. Excellent. Thanks. The discussion that we had in the education session felt very aligned to what a lot of the programming was at the conference. And actually, what was interesting to me is a lot of the ideas also we're seeing in action today. And then I realized, oh, if we're talking 17 years out, it's probably going to take education that long to change, so probably makes sense. But the first three here actually really sort of circle around the same sort of culture change that we're seeing around what technology is doing for us. So this idea of anytime, anywhere, access to information. We're seeing, people taking college courses while sitting in Starbucks. We're seeing people on a train kind of boning up on skills while they're watching lynda.com on their iPhone. There's a lot of access to knowledge available at all times, and so that seemed to be a theme that felt very resonant for how things are gonna change for learners. With that, we're also seeing a lot of attention to data, so understanding how data can become feedback for learners. So algorithms actually helping us configure learning environments. So Joel Rose, who was a speaker here, was also one of the catalysts. There was a lot of sort of building on it, building in the discussion based on the kinds of work that he's been doing. There was a quote that John Daisy said, who was superintendent of LAUSD, who was also one of the catalysts, which I really loved. He said, even your latte is configurable these days, right? So there's a kind of cultural trend of choice. We're all actually, in most environments that we're in, able to choose the kind of experience that we want to have. And what he was pointing out was that's absolutely not happening in education, but it felt like a theme in the world and where education is going to have to head because there'll be such demand from learners. What was, I think, really nice is those first three really kind of center around, in a way, the way technology is changing what we expect of the world. But there was also a great discussion that came up around connecting with people and community. So it wasn't just that technology seems to be the major theme, but these connections to community and service actually came up as a great theme across the entire week. So that learning actually is we may have a lot happening in technology and learning, but we also probably will see a lot more community-based and project-based activities. So some great themes. So some of the ideas that people came up with out of these themes, I don't know why I find this one so hilarious, but in education there are these terms, there's a lot of terms in every sector, but a lot of people talk about the old days of learning was sage on stage, and now we're all about guide on the side. So teachers are more facilitators, but this sort of idea of teachers as data scientists came up, and so we called it dude on data, right? So there's from sage on stage to dude on data. But the idea of a teacher actually seeing data continuously as a way to give feedback to students felt like the kind of learning mode of the future. And then I thought this one, just to share one more, was pretty provocative, the idea of celebrity teachers. So we have celebrity chefs now, and television has actually played a great role in helping people understand what cooking is all about and how to think about it. And so imagine if the way that we have celebrity chefs on television, we might have something like that for teachers. So that felt pretty inspiring. So thank you all for coming.
I'm Jocelyn. I led the health session yesterday. How many of you were in that one? All right, great. So a few of the themes that came up in the health session yesterday, the first was patients kind of taking control of their own health, whether that's through self-diagnosis, through WebMD, or wearing bands and tracking their exercise and sleep. But patients are now talking to their doctors and telling them what they might have and what treatment they might need. We're seeing a shift from hospital care to home care. This is partially because the hospitals are overfilled. It's really expensive to keep people in hospitals, and there really are more and more opportunities to let patients be at home. We're talking about health as the flip side of disease. So how do we actually provide incentives in the healthcare system to really focus on wellness as opposed to treatment of disease or sickness? And the last one was really recognizing that around the world, especially, both inside and outside of the US, there's a shortage of doctor and trained healthcare workers. So how can we use things like community health workers to actually be able to provide more widespread services and access to affordable healthcare? So a few of the ideas that came up, one was to take this notion of national service, which has been buzzing around at the Ideas Festival all week, and think about a health service corps. So how could we take national volunteers and have them serve for a year by providing health services to the underserved in America? How can we move to a group care model where instead of providing individual care, wellness could actually be coached in a group setting? And the last one was smart subsidies. So the US government is subsidizing corn, which actually has really detrimental health impacts on people. How could we actually shift those subsidies to subsidize fruits and vegetables and encourage healthy eating amongst children and adults?
It's interesting to me, because I was in the session yesterday, and it was, Zeke Emanuel, pretty smart guy. And what was really funny is that it's like, we had this young woman, I don't know how old she was, who had this idea around kind of data, and Zeke was like, totally like, these data devices aren't working. And there was a big discussion and dialogue, and she was able to have a dialogue with him because she had ideas to work with, like she had real things. And actually, it was interesting to see how often the kind of tables were kind of, or things were leveled because people were actually coming forward with real things that they could actually design. And it's harder to actually respond to say, no, that's not possible when that's the case. I had citizenship, certainly a huge theme for us in this case. And I heard a lot of things. One was that we're seeing increasing focus on the local level. And we had Mitch Landrieu, mayor of New Orleans. He was like, yes, awesome. That was actually great. But really like this whole focus that basically federal might just be too big for us to understand. My favorite thing was basically the recognition that yes, social media is a platform for action, but increasingly social media is a tool for empathy, mass empathy. So one of the things that came up was the idea that it's actually, suddenly you had people in America who had empathy for Arab Spring and what that meant, and it actually shifted and balanced people's perspectives. I actually think that one of the things that we're seeing through this entire week is that I believe a hopeful reemergence of empathy for others. There's a lot of big, amazing changes that have happened this week, if you think about it. And I think a lot of it is about that. Service is a big thing, and service may well be the future of the ways people actually engage, and that's the way we think about citizenship. We had a woman who was quite provocative, who basically said, I believe that you should only be allowed to be a citizen if you've actually done service before, if you've done a year of service. And it was great to see Heather Smith from Rock the Vote kind of respond to that in a build on it kind of fashion. It was really, really interesting thing to go. And a lot of conversations about millennials and the ways they're working around the system, that they're actually figuring out ways to kind of go around it. I have a slightly different design solution because we were able to take these ideas to actually the Aspen scholars, the Bezos scholars, and have them build on it. And one of my favorite things that came up is like, and by the way, this was done like they did the whole ideation in 30 minutes, so don't judge the final quality. But it was an app that allowed you to see local service issues, and that you could basically find things that needed to happen in your community and sign up to serve in your local community. So basically, and the idea was you move to a new town, you don't know anybody, I'm gonna go service first as a way to meet the people I wanna meet and actually learn about the communities I'm in. I thought it was a really lovely, amazing idea that we actually immediately handed off to the Franklin Project and said, do this. So we'll see. We'll see. And this kid should totally charge Aspen a ton of money for the design consultancy work that he did. But it was a really interesting conversation. So with that, I mean, there's no way we could cover off on all the themes. We have stuff all around the room. We're going to be trying to capture things and maybe get up at least on the Aspen blog so you can sort of see other things. I'd love to just hear other questions. Anyone in any sessions where you feel like there were things that came forward? Just like a moment to kind of hear from you all. I think there's someone in the back.
Hi, I'm Laurie Tisch, president of the Laurie M. Tisch Illumination Fund. And we've done some of these local solutions. So I don't know, have any of you heard of the New York City Green Card Project? Actually, I've spoken about it here, but a law was changed to allow 1,000 fruits and vegetable mobile vending carts onto the streets of New York where studies had shown little or no access to healthy foods. We now have 500. This is just a commercial, but we now have. my question is, don't you think that's great? But anyway, we now have 500 green cards out there and created over 800 jobs. And we're only funding in New York, but we have done so many studies, and we really are happy to help, any other city or rural area do the same thing. And then we just put $15 million into building healthy communities. And another local solution that it's just getting off the ground, so I can't report on it, but we're working with Michel Nishan in Wholesome Wave, and he's working with specific hospitals like Montefiore, where there's working with patients who have high BMI and are at risk for diet-related diseases. The doctors are giving them prescriptions. It's called Fruits and Vegetable RX, giving them prescriptions, which then they're taking to the food markets, to the all the
awesome.
local food markets, and actually getting free fruits and vegetables.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so, and that's,
And what's funny, actually, because
That's
Zeke
all up on
Emanuel
our website.
talked about that quite a bit yesterday, which is basically like you're in a healthcare system, that's where you should be learning about food if you can. And just to kind of add to your promo, I buy an apple from the Tribeca local fruit stand every day. So it's like, so I'm assuming it must be yours, but it's like, it's right around the corner. Oh, yeah, well, Tribeca's not that. Yeah, sorry. Well, great. Okay, awesome. Me too, up with apples. There's a gentleman back there, actually.
Dennis Scholl from the Knight Foundation. We did a survey recently, and we asked 43,000 people what attached them to their community. And of the 16 choices, civic engagement came in 16th in every single community. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about this interesting concept of the workaround for the millennials, that they're not really interested in engaging with government, and that they're finding another way to be engaged locally within their communities, doing civic things, but not necessarily working through or with government.
Yeah, it's funny. I was actually chatting with some people from Aspen Institute, and I was trying to get a sense of why this, I don't know if you all feel this way, but why this last couple of days have felt more hopeful than some of the ones I've seen before, actually, and lots of different reasons. People are like, the economy's on the rise. I'm like, I'm not sure that's what it is, but it's like, one of the things I think is that we're seeing workarounds play out everywhere, right? And so if you think about it, Perry Chen was here talking about Kickstarter. I'd heard a statistic from Heather Smith that basically said that Kickstarter has funded more arts this year than the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts. More arts. That's a, right. Right, it's like, sorry, but that's a workaround, and it exists. And so the reality is they're everywhere now. And that's actually why I loved this idea, is it's a workaround. It's basically like, let me go right to the local place where I can actually kind of serve on the things that I care about. And so I actually feel like we may be in the age of the workaround, and technology is letting us do it. It's not because of technology that's happening, but it gives us a platform to do it. A really interesting thing we're always interested in local food networks, right? And like how people are actually kind of like, you're seeing farm to table play out constantly. Farm to table doesn't happen because I'm, a restaurant and you're a farmer and we're best friends. It happens because of email. The reason why you can have farm to table is because somebody can email and find a farm and then actually bring things together. Technology is letting us kind of work around systems in really profound ways. It's very exciting, I think.
I thought, I'm going to talk more about your process. I thought the most interesting thing about the sessions you guys ran was that they seemed like proper brainstormings, that I don't think the world has figured out, as well as you guys have, how to keep sort of little groups and keep it positive and not have negative ideas, but to keep adding a new question and getting people to just throw out everything and write it all down, and whether it got into the final report or it didn't get into the final report, everybody leaves the process feeling like there was just tons of stuff that came out, and it comes from a very optimistic place. I'm wondering if you could talk through a little bit of your process and how you guys do that, and why it is that so few people actually know how to do that properly.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, actually. And one of the things that we actually really did try to do when we went into the sessions is we tried to keep people from going into, and in some cases you saw it kind of stopped directly, like Patrice did a great job, which we decided we didn't want to go into things like policy. We didn't want to go to things that we basically knew were foundational conversation stoppers. So the idea of being generative means that sometimes you actually put aside some things that you know are really are big issues and kind of go there. It is about optimism and hope. We also made sure there was wine, and lots of wine. Totally helps, actually. It's like in the context. Wine at altitude, you've got it all going for you. It's like, but I will tell you, and this is just, I guess, a testament to those who participate. It's like, we don't know. You never know if it's going to work, and sometimes it doesn't work, actually. But it's like, it did almost every time, and I was sort of impressed. And I think it's actually because people want to be there. They want to be optimistic. They want to generate. They want to think in ideas. And what's great about this festival is you get a lot of broad ideas, but then when suddenly you get to say, okay, well, think specifically about what might happen, you get really interesting kinds of other things. I'm happy to talk more about the process and how we work with it. So,
I'm going to follow up on.
Yeah.
I'd love to follow up on him on the process part. Do you have a how-to book? Because really trying to figure out what are the right questions. I loved your concept of don't ask.
Yeah.
And listening. I think all of us think we know how to listen, but do we really know how to listen?
yeah. Well, so I'll give it. So guess we have a ton. So so first of all, online right now, there's two things that you can actually see. One is the Human-Centered Design Toolkit, which is the new name is that still it? HCD Connect, which is actually a tool that basically kind of walks us through the process. There's one if you're an educator that's actually specifically focused around education, design thinking for educators, which is actually about helping people build new and innovative curriculums. We have plenty of books, and then our founder, David Kelly, is coming out with a book in 2 months, in October, on creative confidence, which is actually about, which we're all so excited about, which is actually more about like, why have we lost our kind of knack for creativity? You know, if you think about like, children are amazing at kind of being creative and kind of engaging, and somehow we unlearn it. And so his book is all about that, and a little bit about how to kind of recapture that creative confidence. So tons of stuff, and we can get, but just go to our site and you'll find stuff as well. By the way, I don't know what time it is, so if it's like noon or something, let me know. Okay, cool. All right, cool. Okay.
I thought this was really positive. I thought it was great. I'm struck by the design thinking process. I just wonder, how do you, it seems like in a very short period of time, 4 groups came to some really interesting findings.
Yeah.
It seems the wonderful thing about this is we get together for a short period of time. We come from all different backgrounds,
Yeah.
and we can do this type of work.
Yeah.
How do you deepen this? Because it seems like if you could actually create a structure where you could get people like this to spend some real time doing this process,
Yeah.
we'd actually come to some really great solutions that
I agree.
actually could be implemented.
I agree, and I mean, to be honest, this was an experiment. I mean, this is the first time where we've actually done something where we're like, let's take the Ideas Festival and see if we can actually get to kind of generative ideas out of it. I think how to take it further. First of all, and I didn't go into it because it's a whole other story. It's like how to get things into the world is the hardest piece. Like having great ideas is the fun and optimistic piece. It's like getting them implemented is the thing that actually where the most work has to happen. And so it's quite funny is like you can get to ideas in kind of quick and amazing ways, but then actually how to implement becomes the thing to work with. It's one of the reasons why we're really interested in things like these workaround systems, the systems that kind of play, because there actually are so many tools out there right now that actually allow us to kind of walk around like a very bureaucratic or difficult system and allow us to kind of implement in different ways. So we think a lot about implementation. There's things that we really treasure when we think about that, workarounds being one of them, and new technology systems that allow us to do that. However, it wasn't the goal here, but hey, make a challenge to us, we'll try it next year. We'll totally try it next year, we'll see. But other questions, thoughts? I think there's one more.
Thanks. So you spoke briefly about precedents and always kind of looking at historical examples. How do you keep that from kind of boxing you into an area of design, especially kind of new product design where you have a physical embodiment of something that may not have changed for 50 years? How do you kind of get that out of your head once you look at it?
Well, we have to. I mean, it's a good piece of the work that we do. And so one of the things that I think, I mean, there are 3 things that we believe is that people are changing, and they're changing faster than ever, and we're seeing that kind of radical shift. And so and part of it's actually driven by technology, part of it's driven by other things, but what we believe is that it means that you have to kind of be continually observant of the fact that people are shifting, and that's what gets you past the notion of precedent. Because if you know that people aren't going to the libraries for the same reasons that they went before, that actually means that you're going to think differently about libraries, for instance. And so it's why we actually always start our work with kind of deep human-centered observation and insight, is because once you do that, you start to say, oh wait, people are doing things differently, we actually have to kind of engage. So and again, going back to the example I used, it's like people aren't reading. Well, people are reading, they're just reading differently than they did before. So it's like, what does that mean? And so it's actually a really foundational piece. One of the things, sorry. Talk about that actually helps us a lot, but it goes back to the observation piece, is that we spend quite a bit of time looking when we're designing at analogs, things that are not the things that we're designing, but things that actually have some of the characteristics of the things that we're designing. So we kind of like try to build off of that. So we just did a project with Weight Watchers, and we were looking at Weight Watchers meetings, and we went to churches, lots of churches, because we're like, where do people actually engage and believe and continue on? And that was a great place to go for analog. So we try to kind of bring in outside observation as much as possible. I think the last thing is keeping your eyes open, not looking at your phone, reflecting on what you've done is one of the most powerful things that basically proves to you that we can't be just looking at the ways we've done things in the past, because all new things are out there. Do I have time for more? I have one more.
Idea.
Surprise! Yeah.
How do you move the discussion from the idea generation trying to get as many fresh ideas as possible to the consensus and collaboration necessary to move that idea to implementation.
Yeah, and there's a lot of tools. I mean, so like in a process like what we ran here, which was actually much looser and where we weren't actually as concerned and whatever. Often what we'll do are things that are quite simple, which is vote. What actually, and the reason that actually does work for IDEO teams is that we're not one profile, right? So if you're at IDEO and you're a designer, you could be a business designer, an anthropologist, an architect, a filmmaker, a storyteller. I mean, a real range. And so often the norming actually happens with very different people in the room. So you actually get to kind of good things. Honestly, in our work, what we find is that the good ideas emerge. Like it's like at some point, like you're everyone's sort of like, oh, that's it, and it's like, and you can sort of see it. And so it takes a while. It takes a lot of conversation. We talk a lot at IDEO. It's like, but we do it because we believe that when you do, actually, you'll see those things kind of fall forward. The way we do it is a little different than when we do it with big teams. We just did a innovation session on a 747 flying from Silicon Valley to London, and talk about bravery for designers. Like that was a brave thing to do, and we relied entirely on voting to kind of get the ideas to go forward. The ideas that came forward were amazing, that were really remarkable, and it was just because you had this diverse selection of people on a team who were actually having to kind of decide which was the best idea and then pull it from there. So it's a simple answer, but there's a lot of other ways. Do I have any? Is it? Oh, 7 minutes. Oh, okay. Well, is there anyone else who wants to ask a question, or does anyone just want 7 minutes to get their melanoma screening? Or no, sorry. It's like,
I want to hear what happened with Weight Watchers and what people do in libraries.
So Weight Watchers. There's an interesting story about Weight Watchers. It's one of my favorite. It's my favorite empathy story. So David Kirchhoff, who's been here many times, he's great. The president of Weight Watchers. We admire them a lot for the work that they've done, and really, really focusing on kind of thinking about the nation and nutrition. But what's interesting when we started this project, this is just a little anecdote, is that they were like, we want to fix everything, we want to change everything, but we don't want to shift the meetings. Like we're like, the meetings are actually pretty good. And so what's funny is, we went to the meetings, and I would go to the meetings, and I was like, these meetings are terrifying. Like I was so terrified. I was like so intimidated, and I would find myself like driving up to the parking lot and like seeing it, and then like totally drive away. And by the way, so would their people. Like it was intimidating to the people there. And so but they didn't believe it. They were just like, no, we've been doing meetings, it's the foundation. And so what we did is we actually took their leadership team, we were in Dallas, and we took them to a church called, and I can't remember, it's like the Potters, I can't remember what it is, but what is it? Might be, right. And it's like, and I think their membership is some upwards of like 100,000. A common meeting is about 30,000 people. And so we were like, let's go look at an extreme meeting. So we went with their leadership to go look at this extreme meeting. And so we're driving with their executives to go to this meeting, and you start to see this traffic jam happening. And they're like, why is there so much traffic? And we're like, well, it's because they're all in traffic to get to this meeting. And they're like, oh, this is going to make us late for our next thing. Maybe we shouldn't go. And we're like, no, let's keep going. And we get closer, and we're driving in, and there's like people directing you to your stalls, like the way that you'd be at Disney World, kind of directing people in. And they're like, oh, we don't have time. We'll be stuck in traffic. Whatever. We shouldn't go. Whatever. And we park. And we're like, let's just go. We'll just go for 10 minutes. And then we get out, and it's Dallas. And so like it's like nobody looks like us. They're all like, their hair is like amazing and whatever. and the client is basically like, we're going to stand out. I feel really weird. I think it's really uncomfortable. And we said, stop. This is what it's like when you go to your meetings. This is the exact experience. And so literally, they were like, there was an email that went out the next day being like, we're looking at our meetings. We're going to think about everything. But and it's a great example of using an analog and an empathic exercise to get people to see where the future was. So, and there's a lot that came out of it that I can't talk about. I actually just can't. I'm not allowed to talk about. But that was just one quick story there. I'm going to stop because I think we can all talk individually, but I think you should enjoy the sunshine, but not too much. And we'll talk soon. Thank you.